dinner, my son humiliated me. You're the worst father living off us. Then I revealed my secret. The fork froze halfway to my mouth when my son slammed his glass down hard enough to crack the tablecloth silence and shouted the words that would end one version of our family and begin another. You're the worst father alive, living off us like a parasite. My name is Daniel. I am 61 years old, and until that Sunday evening in my son's dining room, I had spent 11 years letting my family believe a lie I built with my own hands, for reasons I thought were noble. I was wrong about the reasons. I was not wrong about the lie holding. Let me back up, because you need to understand the years before you'll understand the silence that followed his words. 11 years ago, I sold my logistics company, the one I'd built from a single delivery van and a phone number scrawled on the back of a business card, to a regional freight conglomerate for an amount that changed my life and I thought my family's forever. I didn't tell them the number. I never have. Not my late wife Carol before the cancer took her 4 years later. Not my son Marcus. Not my daughter-in-law Priya. Not my 2 grandchildren, who call me Grandpa Dan and think Grandpa's old flannel shirts are just something old men wear because they don't know better. After the sale, I made a decision that, looking back, was either the wisest or the cruelest thing I've ever done. I decided I want to know what it felt like to be loved without money attached to it. I'd grown up poor in a mill town, watched my own father get treated like royalty by relatives only when his paycheck came in, and treated like furniture the rest of the year. I swore I'd never let money be the reason anyone looked at me twice. So I hid it. I put nearly all of it into a trust, structured so quietly that even my accountant only sees pieces of the picture, administered by a firm 3 states away that reports to no one but me. I kept a modest condo. I drove a 12-year-old Honda with a dent in the rear bumper I never bothered to fix. When Marcus and Priya bought their first house, I helped with what looked like a retiree's generous gift, $20,000, which they thought was most of what I had left after Carol's medical bills. It wasn't even a rounding error. For 11 years, I let them believe I was a man scraping by on a modest pension and social security, living in a small apartment on the edge of their town, showing up every Sunday with a cheap bottle of wine and second-hand toys for the kids. And for 11 years, that arrangement worked, more or less. I got to see, without any performance or flattery clouding it, who my son really was when he thought there was nothing to gain from me. The answer, I discovered slowly and then all at once, was not who I hoped he'd be. It started small, complaints about how I always showed up empty-handed except for wine, even though I brought groceries every other week and quietly slipped cash into Priya's purse for the kids' school supplies, cash I never mentioned because I didn't want credit, I wanted love. Then it became comments at holidays, sharper each year. Must be nice to retire and just show up for dinner, Marcus said one Thanksgiving, not quite joking. Then, this past year, it became something else entirely, a low hum of resentment I could feel every time I walked through his door, like I was a guest who'd overstayed a welcome that had never really been extended. I told myself it was stress. Marcus managed a mid-sized marketing firm, and the last 2 years had been brutal for his industry, layoffs, shrinking budgets, a mortgage that had ballooned with the rate hikes. Priya had gone part-time after their younger daughter, Lily, was diagnosed with a learning difference that needed extra support and extra money neither of them had. I watched all of it happen from the outside, holding my silence like a stone in my pocket, waiting for what I'm still not entirely sure. For him to ask for help honestly, maybe. For him to become, on his own, the kind of man who'd rather struggle with dignity than resent an old man's frugal Sunday visits. He never asked, he just got angrier. That Sunday, the dinner that broke everything open, started ordinarily enough. Pot roast, the kids fighting over who got to sit next to me, Priya looking exhausted in a way that made my chest ache with a helplessness I'd chosen for myself. Marcus had been drinking more than usual 2 beers before dinner even started, which wasn't like him. I should have noticed that as a warning sign. I didn't. The trouble began over something absurdly small. I mentioned, casually, that I'd need to leave a little early because I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for the next morning downtown and wanted a good night's sleep beforehand. Downtown, Marcus repeated, not looking up from his plate. Must be nice. You've got nothing but time for doctor's appointments and Sunday dinners. Must be real nice. Marcus, Priya said quietly, a warning in her voice she'd clearly used before. No, I'm serious. He put his fork down. His face had gone that particular shade of red I remembered from when he was 17 and furious about a curfew. He shows up here every week, eats our food, plays with the kids for an hour, and then goes home to his little apartment and does what exactly? What do you even do all week, Dad? Marcus, that's enough, Priya said, sharper now. It's not enough. It's not close to enough. He stood up, chair scraping against the hardwood, and the kids went quiet and small in their seats the way children do when they sense the air in a room has changed chemistry. You know what it's like working 60 hours a week, watching my daughter struggle and not being able to get her the tutor she needs, watching my son ask why we can't go to Disney World like his friends, and then having you show up here every Sunday like some kind of freeloading house guest who thinks a bottle of $10 wine makes up for the fact that you've contributed nothing since Mom died. You're not even trying anymore. You're the worst father alive. You're living off us, off this family, and acting like you're doing us a favor by showing up. The room went silent in a way that felt total, like the house itself had stopped breathing. Lily, 7 years old, had tears standing in her eyes, confused and frightened, looking between her father and me like she was trying to understand which one of us was the villain in a story she didn't know the shape of yet. My grandson, Theo, 10, just stared at his plate. I sat there for a long moment. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't, not at first. What I felt was something closer to grief, the specific grief of realizing that an experiment you ran with love as its intention had produced a result you never wanted. And that the person standing across from you, red-faced and shaking, was suffering in a way I could have ended with a single phone call to my lawyer 11 years ago. But grief has a way of curdling, given enough silence, and by the time I opened my mouth, something colder had settled into me. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. He didn't. "I'm serious, Dad. I've been carrying you for years and pretending it's fine, and I'm done pretending." I said sit down. My voice came out lower than I intended, and something in it, maybe just the strangeness of hearing me sound like that, made him actually do it. Priya's hand had gone to her mouth. The kids were frozen. I set my fork down beside my plate, carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to break in your grip. "You think I've been living off you," I said. "You think that for 11 years I've shown up here at your table, eating your food and contributing nothing because I have nothing to contribute. Is that right?" "Dad, I didn't mean." "Is that right?" I asked again, and he had the decency to look ashamed, if only for a second, before the exhaustion and resentment pulled his face back into that hard mask. "Yeah," he said, "that's right." I nodded slowly, then I reached into my jacket pocket, the same worn brown jacket I'd worn to 100 Sunday dinners, the one Priya once joked looked like it belonged in a donation bin, and I took out my phone. I opened an email I'd received that morning from my financial advisor, a routine quarterly summary I usually skimmed and archived without a second thought, and I turned the screen around so Marcus could see it. "Read the number at the top," I said. He squinted at it, confused, the anger in his face giving way slowly to something else. "What is this?" "Read it out loud." He read it, his voice cracked in the middle of the number, like it physically couldn't finish the sentence in one breath. Priya leaned over his shoulder to look, and her hand, the one still near her mouth, dropped slowly to the table like it had lost the strength to stay raised. "That's a joke," Marcus said. "That's Dad, that's not real." "It's real," I said. "It's the balance of a trust I've held since I sold the company. I sold it for a great deal more than either of you ever imagined, because I never told either of you what it sold for. I let you believe I was living on a small pension. I drive a car with 140,000 miles on it because I like that car, not because I can't afford another one. I've had that number sitting there, quietly growing, for 11 years, and I have touched almost none of it because I wanted, God help me, I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved by my own son, without my bank account in the room with us." The silence that followed was different from the one before. That first silence had been frightened. This one was something closer to devastation. "Why," Priya finally said, very quietly, "would you do that to us?" "Because my father taught me, without meaning to, that money changes how people look at you," I said, and I could feel my voice shaking now, the anger finally arriving, late but full. Relatives who ignored him all year would show up smiling the week his overtime check came in. I swore I'd never be loved for what was in my wallet. I wanted Sunday dinners because you wanted me there, not because you wanted what I could give you. I wanted grandchildren who liked my company, not my checkbook. And for years, Marcus, I got exactly that. You used to call just to talk. You used to bring the kids to my apartment because you wanted them to know me, not because you needed something from me. And somewhere along the way, that stopped, and instead of ever once in 3 years of struggling, asking your own father for help, you decided the story that made the most sense was that I was a burden. That I was worthless, that I was the worst father alive. "Dad." "I'm not finished." I was standing now, though I don't remember deciding to stand. "I have watched you struggle for 2 years. I have watched Priya go part-time and watched Lily need help you couldn't afford and watched you drink 2 beers before dinner on a Sunday because you're carrying more than any one person should carry alone. And I said nothing because I was afraid that the moment you knew what I had, everything real between us would curdle into a transaction. I was protecting something I thought was precious. And what it turned out I was actually doing was letting my own son sit alone, with a weight I could have lifted in a single afternoon, because I was more attached to an idea of unconditional love than I was to the actual, unglamorous work of being your father. Marcus's face had crumpled entirely now, all the anger burned off and nothing left underneath it but a kind of raw, childlike shame. "I didn't know," he said. "Dad, I swear to God I didn't know, if I'd known." "If you'd known what, you'd have been kinder to me. You'd have asked for help sooner. Marcus, you shouldn't need to know a number to treat your father with basic decency. That's the part that's been sitting wrong in my chest all through this dinner. It's not that you didn't know I was wealthy. It's that you decided, on the evidence of one modest apartment and one old car, that I was worthless, and that gave you permission to say what you just said to me in front of my grandchildren." Lily was crying openly now, and Theo had gone to sit beside her, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture so much older than his 10 years that it broke something loose in my chest. Priya had her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and it came out broken, nothing like the man who'd stood up 10 minutes earlier throwing accusations like stones. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I don't even know where to start." I looked at him for a long moment, my son, 40 years old, undone at his own dinner table, and I felt the anger in me finally give way to something more complicated, something that had grief and love tangled up together so tightly I couldn't separate the strands. "I'm going to help you," I said. "The tutor for Lily, the mortgage, whatever this house needs. I was always going to, eventually. I'd already started the paperwork for a fund for the grandchildren's education, and I was planning on telling you about it at Christmas when it felt like a gift and not a rescue. But I want you to understand something, Marcus, and I want you to understand it clearly, because I won't say it twice. The money was never the test. The test was always whether you'd have kept loving the man in the flannel shirt, and the dented Honda if that email had never come, if I'd taken this secret to my grave the way I once thought I might. And tonight, before you saw that number, you told me exactly who I was to you when you thought there was nothing to gain." Nobody spoke, somewhere in the kitchen. The oven timer for a dessert no one would eat that night let out a soft, oblivious beep. "I need to go home," I said finally, and I meant it gently, not as another blow. "Not because I'm angry, though I am, but because I think you all need a night to sit with this without me in the room. I'll call you Wednesday. We'll talk about Lily's tutor, about the mortgage, about all of it, like a family should talk about things. But I needed you to hear tonight, while it was still raw, that I was never the worst father alive for having little. If I've failed you, Marcus, it was for having too much, and being too afraid of what it might cost me to share it." I kissed the top of Lily's head on my way out, and Theo hugged my waist so tightly I had to steady myself against the doorframe. Priya walked me to the car, apologizing in fragments the whole way, and I told her honestly that I didn't need her apology. I needed all of us together, to build something better than either the lie I'd told or the accusation Marcus had thrown. Marcus didn't come to the door. When I looked back from the driveway, I saw him still sitting at the table through the window, head in his hands, the pot roast going cold in front of him, looking like a man finally seeing the actual shape of the years he'd spent so certain he understood his own father. He called me Tuesday night, not Wednesday. He'd barely slept, he said. He wanted to come by my apartment, my real one, not the modest cover I'd shown him for over a decade, and see with his own eyes the life I'd actually been living. When he arrived, he stood in my small living room, looking at the same second-hand furniture, the same photographs of Carol, the same ordinary quiet life I'd chosen on purpose, and he cried in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "You really lived like this," he said, "with all of it just sitting there." "I really did," I said. "I wanted to know what I was worth to you without it. I know now that I asked the wrong question, and that I let you carry a weight I should have helped you set down years ago. We're both going to have to live with the mistakes we made getting here. We're rebuilding it slowly, not the money, that part is simple, contracts and transfers and phone calls to lawyers. The harder part is teaching each other, all over again, how to sit at a table together without either secrecy or resentment sitting in the extra chair. Some Sundays it still feels tender, like a bruise you keep forgetting is there until someone brushes against it. But Lily has her tutor now. Marcus sleeps better. And last week, for the first time in longer than I can remember, he called me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, just to tell me about a joke Theo had made, for no reason at all except that he wanted to share it with his father. That's the number that actually matters. I just wish it hadn't taken a night of humiliation and a screen full of digits to remind us both of that.